I've been playing with some new APIs from Remix for building optimistic UIs, and I want to show you what I've learned. And to do that, we are going to be looking at this work journal app, which comes from the Remix course I just finished. But it's a pretty simple app, and it lets you add entries. I'm recording a video, and save them. And then they show up here in the list. And you'll see that we currently have some pending UI here, learning 1. So when we click this, we dim out the form, and then we refocus it and clear the input once it shows up in the list down below. And we want to turn this form into an optimistic UI so that I can just add an entry, add another one. I don't have to wait on the network. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. And the first step here is to get rid of this pending UI in this form. So let's come over here to our index page, and we'll see the form is rendering this entry form component. And this component uses a fetcher to render a fetcher.form. And fetchers are good for rendering forms without a navigation, great for any interaction that stays on the same page, which is why we use this, because we are on the index route here. And when we save a new entry, we don't want to navigate anywhere. So that's why we're using fetcher. And we'll see right here is where we disable the field set when the fetcher's state is not idle. So a fetcher can be submitting or loading. We disable it and we fade it out to 70% opacity. Let's just get rid of this and we'll test this out. And now we don't see the form being disabled anymore. We still see this saving label. So let's come down here and we'll just make this say save. And so now our form doesn't have that pending UI anymore. And if we come here and save it, we can talk about how to get this new entry to show up immediately in our list of entries right here. And how might we do this? Because right here, we're working with this entry form component, which we're rendering here in the index route. So how can we get the data from the form over here to the index route? Well, it turns out there is an awesome hook in Remix called useFetchers, which is perfect for this. So let's grab useFetchers, and I'll just go ahead and grab the fetchers and log them so we can see what we're working with. Let's come over here and open up the console and create an entry. And here we're going to see the fetchers being logged. If we look at this first one, we see that there's one fetcher right here. It has this form data object and the state of submitting. And then down here, we get a re-render with loading. And then finally, we get one with idle. So you can see what this hook is doing. It is actually giving us access to all of the current pending fetchers in our Remix app globally here without us having to thread through props or send any data up from our form. We just get to use this hook and access all currently pending fetchers right here in our index component. So this is perfect because we'll be able to grab the form data from these fetchers that are kind of in flight and basically append them to our list of entries in the index. So let's do that. Let's actually grab these fetchers and map them, and then we can grab the form data from each one. And if we call object from entries, then that'll give us the data. And it looks like form data can be undefined. So let's go ahead and wrap this if f.formData. And then we'll return the data here. And these will be our optimistic entries. These entries come from our loader right here on the server, but these will be optimistic entries, just like this. So let's go ahead and log optimistic entries, and we'll see what we're working with here. So it starts out empty, and if I type in A, we see the form data in this first state, and then we see the form data in the second state, and then we saw the third state. Once it's idle, it gets cleared from form data. But this is good. We're going to be able to use this data here in our entries list. But because it does get cleared, let's go ahead and change this into a reduce, and we'll just ignore the case where there is no form data. So I'm going to change this to reduce, and we'll give it a memo in each fetcher, and this will be an array. And if we do have form data, we'll go ahead and memo.push this data, and then we'll return the memo. And now those optimistic entries should just be an empty array, or if we submit something, we'll see the optimistic version right here and right here during the submission and revalidation, but then it goes empty again. So this is a little bit cleaner to work with. And we see that we want to give some type information to our reduce. Ultimately, we want these to be alongside of our entries. So let's come up here and we have an entry type right here in this file. This is going to be an array of entries, and an entry just has date, ID, type, and text. So we are seeing here that this is just a string of form data values. I actually have this little validate function that I'm using in my action that turns in the form data into the valid data here. So we can just reuse it right here. Validate. And this is going to give us the date, type, and text, which we see we actually do have, but we don't have an ID. And this is going to tell us ID is missing in the type. And so for us to kind of render these optimistically, we want them to look as if they are an entry. And we don't have an ID yet because the ID is currently being generated on the server side. So let's just make up an ID so that we can get these to conform to the same type so that the rest of our UI will behave correctly. And if we look here at entry, we'll see ID is a number. So let's just come here and push our data as well as an ID. And let's just make this 9999 for now, just to see if this all works. So I'll clear my console, type in an entry, and let's check it out. There we have our optimistic entry. And it looks like the data is all good on every render here. So how do we combine our optimistic entries with our entries from the server right here so they show up in the list? Well, this is pretty cool. We can just redefine entries as entries plus our optimistic entries. And now if I change this date, let's just go to next week so we see it at the top of this list. Let's test this out. Look at that. Right there we see it. New entry. As soon as I hit save, we see it show up. We see the optimistic entries being updated, and then eventually this is revalidated. So if I were to refresh this, we're going to see it right there. So that's kind of the bread and butter of this technique. We basically need to get the data from the form over into our index route via useFetchers and then append it to the list of entries from the server that's the source of truth and use that to render our UI while those fetchers are in a pending state. And it's pretty cool that all this logic is working here. In fact, if I were to come over to Prisma Studio and go ahead and just start with a fresh database here, and we take a look, I can go ahead and add work 1, work 2, and we're going to see learning 1. All of this is going to get shuffled correctly here in our list. We could change the date to sometime last week and add an interesting thing. And because all of the logic for sorting and grouping is happening right here in our component, it's all going to flow through just fine with our optimistic updates. So pretty good start to this UI. Now, if I click save, we'll notice that our old behavior is still there where I hit save and then we don't clear the text area and refocus it until after the revalidation is finished. And that's because if we come and look at our entry form, we still have this effect code right here. And this doesn't really make sense in an optimistic UI. Ideally, I would want to say work 1 and then hit enter and have it immediately refocus the text area and clear it so I can start entering my next entry. So let's do that now. And the way we're going to do this is come to this form and we can just override the onSubmit handler right here because we kind of want the default behavior to change. So let's call e.prevent default right here since we want to kind of programmatically do a little bit more. And if I just save that and we test something out, then we're not going to see anything happen because we're preventing default. And the way we can programmatically submit a form that is coming from a fetcher is pretty easily. Actually, we can call fetcher dot, and we'll see the submit method right here. And submit takes in a target, which can be some raw JSON, but it can also just be the actual form element, which we have via this event. So if we called event.currentTarget, this is going to give us the actual form. And if I save this and we try again, we should see all the same behavior. That try does make it into the database. If we refresh, we're going to see it right there. But now that we're programmatically submitting this, right after we submit, let's just grab this code from the effect so we can immediately clear and focus this text area. And we want to make sure that we have the ref. So we'll wrap this in a conditional. And now we don't need this effect anymore. And we also don't need this derived state. So let's save this. I'll just refresh and try work 1. And that's pretty cool. Let's bump this up to 2024. Work 1, I'm working in the future here. Work 2. Looks pretty cool. Learning 1. Everything's staying responsive. And this is pretty awesome. Now, one other thing I want to do here is when I hit enter, we get a new line because that's the default behavior for a text area. But it'd be nice if I could just hit enter and submit this and go on to the next one. So let's come down to our text area. And we'll add an on key down event. And if the key is enter, then we'll go ahead and call prevent default. So now I should be able to type, and if I hit enter, nothing happens, which gives us a chance to programmatically submit the form here. And we can do that by emitting a submit event so that this flow just goes through this submit handler up here in our form. And the way we can do that is by using the event, grabbing the current target, which is the text area, and then grabbing the form for that text area. And then we can go ahead and dispatch an event. And this event is going to be the submit event. And we want to make sure this event bubbles up so that our form can get it. And we also want to make sure it's cancelable because we're calling prevent default up here in our form. So right here. So let's see if that worked. We'll go ahead and clear this and refresh. ABC. Let's go back to 2024. Save. The button still works, but now if I type in DEF and hit enter, check that out. Let's go to December. 1, 2, 3. So this is nice, and it's exactly the sort of behavior you'd expect from a UI that's optimistic, quick and responsive. And so this is nice. We don't need this effect anymore. Always love getting rid of use effects. Let's go ahead and delete it up here. And let's come back to Prisma. And we'll just start off with a clean slate here. And let's see what happens if we go a little crazy here. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. So that was interesting. I don't know if you could see that, but we only saw one optimistic entry here in the list. And then when they revalidated, they all showed up. So let's come over to the index. Let's bump up this delay to 1,000. And let's just go to next week. And let me show you this again. Pay attention here to the optimistic list while everything is pending. And I'll clear out this log as well. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. And look at that. It updated each time with the last value from the form I entered. And then once the revalidations happened, they all showed up here. So what is going on? Well, we're still logging our optimistic entries right here. And you'll see that there's only ever a single entry in this array. So even though we submitted the form 3 times, useFetchers seems like it only ever returned a single fetcher. And in fact, that is exactly what's happening. Because if we look at the entry form, we'll see that we're using useFetcher right here, and then we're calling fetcher.submit. So this useFetcher is creating kind of like a singleton fetcher that is bound to this hook invocation. This specific use of useFetcher in this component is tied to this component instance, the lifecycle, the order in our React tree. And so even though we're calling this again and again, this is going to refer to the same kind of singleton fetcher instance. And what we want to do here is create a new fetcher every time we click save. So we actually want the submit event to be creating fetchers, not the rendering of the form. And this is where a brand new API from Remix is going to make our life super easy. I'm on version 2.2. I think that's when it landed, but let me show you how this works. So we don't want to use Fetcher anymore because this is creating a singleton fetcher. So let's go ahead and delete that. And we're actually going to turn this back into a good old remix form. So I'll import that, and we can get rid of useFetcher up here. Now, because we don't have a fetcher, how are we going to be able to programmatically submit this? Well, it turns out there's already a hook in Remix called useSubmit. So if we grab this, we'll actually get a submit function that we can call just like we were before. And so let me go ahead and save this and just show you what the behavior is. I'm going to go ahead and clear the console, and let's go ahead and choose 2 weeks from now. And let's just add an entry. So I'm going to type in test, and I'm going to hit enter. And there we go. We see it in our list, but we didn't see the optimistic version. So again, if I hit M1, we don't see it in the list. It only shows up after the revalidation period. And you'll also notice that our URL added this question mark index. And this is because this is kind of the default form behavior in Remix. It's expecting a navigation, and that's why we're seeing this behavior. And we're also not seeing the optimistic entries in our list because those come from useFetchers, but this is not a fetcher anymore, it's a form. And this is where the new option comes in, because normally with forms, you could only do a submission that involved a navigation. But there's this awesome new option to submit. If we look right here, we're going to see something called navigate. And if we look at the docs, it says navigate false will use a fetcher instead of a navigation. So now we have the ability to create a new fetcher every time we submit, which is exactly what we're trying to do. So let's just say navigate false, save this. We'll come back to, let's say, the first week in December. And let's try this out. Test 1. Check that out. We saw the optimistic UI. I think this was left over, so let's just try refreshing this and coming here and trying it again. Test 2. And right there, we see the optimistic UI working great. So that means this data is in our useFetchers right here. And now let's see what happens if we create a few pretty quickly. So I'll come to the next week, work 1, work 2. And we're getting some extra data in our list here, but we're also seeing an error. It says it encountered 2 children with the same key, 999. We know what that is from right here. We're just creating a static ID, but we can see also in our log that we actually have 2 fetchers, and so they were showing up. So let's go ahead and just turn this into a random number for now. I'll just paste in this getRandomInt function, and let's just call this right here, getRandomInt. And this takes in a min and a max. So let's just say 1000 to 9999, just for now. Okay, let's come and refresh. Let's go to 2024. And let's try work 1, work 2. Okay, work 3. We're definitely getting somewhere. I can type in work 1, work 2, and we'll see them both showing up while they're still pending. Let's go a little bit faster. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's go ahead and clear this out just so we can see, since I'm kind of on a smaller screen here. And let's really put it through the ringer. So I'm going to refresh, close this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, well, eventually it was consistent, but hopefully we can do better than that. It does look like all the data made it in the back end, and the UI was kind of responsive the whole time, but we saw a lot of duplicates there. So let's come and refresh and see if we can get a little reproduction here. So I'm just going to hide the toolbar, and let's refresh this. And let's come make the delay 2 seconds. And I'm just going to do 2 entries here, and let's see what happens. So I'll do 1, 2. Okay, so if you notice that we saw 1 and 2, but then we saw 2 being duplicated there for a second. And if we look at our logs, which we're still logging the optimistic entries, we only ever have 2 fetchers here. So why was that 2 showing up twice? Well, if we take a look at the network tab, we will get a hint. And these are the network requests that went out for those two entries that we just created. So here's when we first loaded the app, and then here are our two post requests. And so we should see one right there and two right there. And then we see 4 gets, and one is for the root, which is getting our session, and then one is for the index, which is getting our entries. So if we look at the index here, we'll see in our loader, this is the data that we're getting. And so this is the way Remix works. After an action goes to the server and comes back, Remix will automatically rerun all of the loaders for the current UI to kind of get the freshest data. And that's why we have 4 of them right here. After the first post goes out, it calls revalidate on all of the loaders. And then after the second post goes out, it calls revalidate. And because these two things are disconnected, you might already kind of see where I'm going here. We actually have a race condition. We first sent our first post out, it created entry 1, and then it came back. But while that was happening, we went ahead and created post 2, right? And that made it in the database. But now post 1 has gotten back and it's going to go revalidate. So post 2 gets created. By the time post 1 sends out its revalidations to rerun the loaders, post 2 is already in the database. And post 1 is just going to run the loader, which just calls Prisma and does a select star from our database, right? It's just getting all the entries that are in there at the time of the request. So that's why 2 is both in the loader from the first post revalidation as well as in our optimistic UI list. So we have a little bit of a race condition here, and we need some way to determine whether an optimistic entry that we have in the client is already part of our server-side kind of canonical state. And we need some way to tie these together. And this is where the concept of client-side IDs come in. And when you start building optimistic UI, client-side IDs are actually basically an indispensable tool, because anytime you render or allow an interaction with a resource on the client and you don't know if it's been saved yet, you need some notion of identity for that resource. So the way we're going to solve this is by having our client-side form give new entries a unique ID, and we're going to use UUIDs, the string UUID, because we can create random ones that are guaranteed more or less to be unique. We're going to send that over to the back end to use that in our database, but that way our front end will know if there is an entry in both the optimistic list or if it's already been saved in our server. And that's exactly what we're going to do next. We are going to allow our client to set the ID for new entries that we create. And to do this, first we need to come over to Prisma, since we're going to be using strings instead of ints. And right here I have the int being auto-generated by our database. Let's just change this to a string. And instead of auto-increment, Prisma has a UUID function right here. So let's save this. We'll stop Prisma Studio and our server. We'll go ahead and migrate our database. We'll call this change ID to string. And then we can run our Remix app as well as Prisma Studio. So it looks like it went ahead and converted our ints here into strings. Let's just clear this out so we kind of have a fresh database. And let's refresh our Remix app and just test this out and see what happens. Okay, it looks like it's saved. If we come over here, we actually do see a UUID string being used for our new record. So this is pretty cool, but this is still being created by the backend, right? This is being set by this default rule in our database, and we want the front end to actually set it from the form. So let's come back to our form. I'll go ahead and close this. And right here, when we submit the form, instead of just submitting the target with all 3 of these fields, we want to add an ID. And the cool thing about the submit function is that the submit target can just be some JSON. So we can go ahead and grab this, which is our form element, and we can create a new form data from this, which means we can get the data using object from entries. And now we can just pass this to submit. And let's go ahead and grab that validate function just real quick for our form and use it to validate this data. So let's see if this works, just that little refactoring from the current target to our JSON object. So I'm going to test this out. And we saw the optimistic version right here, but then it actually disappeared. And if you look at this, our method here is a get request. And that's because the method post was coming from the form, which was automatically passed through when we use the current target. But now that we're just passing data, it defaults to get. Fortunately, there is an option here. We can just say method is post. And if we make that change and try again, it looks like that is a post, and it actually ends up here in our backend. So this is cool. This is like seeing how powerful this useSubmit hook is even further. And we still have method post right here on the actual form, which is nice for progressive enhancement. If someone clicked save before the JavaScript had loaded, or if they were, in an environment where they didn't have JavaScript on a subway or something and the HTML just loaded first, all of this would still work, which is awesome. But now we have this data going through via submit, and we're still getting UUIDs being generated from our backend. What we really want to do is create a new object with an ID prop. And let's just say ABC. We'll just make it a static string right now. And let's just see how to get it back into our backend. So if I come here and refresh, we are sending along the string ABC for the ID. And if we come and look, we'll see it's still not making it to our backend. We need to come back to our indexes action right here. And we'll see that we're calling Prisma create, but we were never passing that ID. We were just letting the backend get it. And so now we actually want to get it from the form data because we're sending it along. So let's grab the ID, and we are going to update this validate helper to also grab the ID and make sure it's a string. And now, if we pass this into Prisma create, let's go ahead and try this out. Create a new record, come here and refresh, and now we have the string ABC. So this is cool. We're letting our client app decide what the ID is for new records. And of course, we don't want to use ABC because that's not random enough. But fortunately, the browser has window.crypto built into it. And there's this really handy random UUID function we can use. And if we save this and we try again, let's go to December. Come and take a look at our new record. Here's December, and the ID does look like a UUID. So now we are passing through that UUID string from the form. And if we come back to the app and go over to the console, I think we're still logging our optimistic entries right here. And let's take a look inside. So we're going to see the date, the text, but the ID here is still a number. And so now we don't have to do this funny get random int anymore because the data coming from the form already has an ID. That's a string, and it's actually the same one that's going to be used on the back end. So we have good identity between kind of these data bags floating around in our client and the canonical server-side data that they represent. And so we don't need to make up this int anymore. We can actually get rid of this, which means we can get rid of this. And we can go ahead and just push this just like that. And now let's clear the console. Let's go to 2024 and try this out. So we saw it show up right away. And if we take a look here, we're going to see 24A3 in our log. And if I come and refresh, 24A3, that's the newest entry we've created. So we are now in a good spot to solve this problem, the race condition that we saw earlier. Let's go ahead and clear the data like this and come back, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did. I'm just going to create 2 entries, and we should see that race condition behavior. So 1, 2. Okay, we saw 2 flash right here. And then we also now get a new warning that we encountered 2 children with the same key. And this makes sense now because this second entry is showing up in the first entry's revalidated loader that's coming back. And because the client has the ID and we're using the ID as a key in the list down in our index page, we actually have two data bags that are the same conceptually. They one has been persisted on the server, one's in the client, but they have the same ID. So now we're seeing this problem show up as a children with same key error. And what we can do here is we don't need to put that into our optimistic entries array if it's already from the server. So let's just filter out any of the optimistic entries whose IDs are already in kind of our server-side list right here. And we can do this by just saying if our entries, and let's just map each entry to an entry ID. If this guy includes data.id, because this is what's coming from the fetchers right here, then we don't want to push. So if it's not in it, then we do want to push. We're only going to push fetcher data that's not already in our loader data right here. So now let's save this. Let's give this a refresh. I'll zoom out. Let's try it. 3, 4. Okay, looks good. 5, 6, 7, 8. Looks really good. We're seeing the revalidations come back, but the UI looks perfect. Let's delete that log, refresh. And let's just try again here. Let's go to 12. Entry 1, entry 2, make a learning, entry 3, entry 4. And this is pretty awesome. Let's take a look at the network tab. There's a lot happening here. And if I go ahead and make this bigger, let's go ahead and go up to 2024. Check out everything that's happening right here. The whole thing stays responsive. We always see everything in the list. And look at all these gets and posts and revalidations. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg with what you can do with this stuff. But I think it's really cool how much Remix is doing for us here. If we go ahead and look at the code, really the meat of it was figuring out this part and that we needed an ID, some sort of identity between our client-side form and our server-side records so we could track those. There's even more improvements coming to Remix around this stuff, which I'm excited to see. But once we had that, and once we changed our form back to a form that used submit, which actually kind of obviates the need for useFetcher, I think. If you just want to submit, you can do this. You never have to switch form to fetcher.form. And with this navigate false option, we're just creating fetchers. And I love this API, this useFetchers API, because we don't have to think about context. We don't have to worry about how are we going to get it from here to there. This shows up a lot in the Remix work that I've been doing lately. You can give these fetchers keys and look them up, all without prop drilling. You can use it for optimistic UI. It's an awesome API. But if we go ahead and just take a look at what we ended up with, start with a clean slate again here, just because it's fun to see how we did. We'll refresh, and we can even come up here and put the delay to like 5 seconds. I mean, why not, right? We're optimistic. So what did I do today? I recorded a video. I worked on a Radix demo. I learned about server actions. We can go back to October when I gave my Next.js conf talk, or the 31st when I launched my Remix course. And we can just keep going here. And the whole time the interface stays responsive, it all just works. Very cool, very fun. One last thing I like to do with optimistic UI is give the user a sense that all the data has been saved. You see this in Google Docs and other apps that kind of sync to the cloud, but kind of hide the pending UI from the user. And so maybe we can come here right to where we say new entry. And let's just wrap this in a flex, inline center, justify between. And let's just drop a little cloud icon right here, cloud icon. We'll grab this from Heroicon's React 20 and Solid. And that's a little big. Let's make it width 4, height 4, and we'll make it textarea 500. And we can show this whenever the data is being saved and hide it once they're all done. How do we know that everything's been revalidated? Well, if there are no more optimistic entries, right? So let's come here and wrap this. If there are optimistic entries, if the length is greater than 0, we'll just render a cloud. 1, 2, 3, see our little cloud, and then it goes away. So pretty awesome, pretty sweet little UI. I learned about useSubmit. And I keep making videos about it. And so everything is responsive here. We see our little syncing icon. Of course, we still have our 5-second delay, but once everything's revalidated, that's going to be, what, 10 seconds to post and then revalidate. It goes away. And if we were to refresh this, then we're going to see all of our data is still here. So that's kind of my little experiment this week. I just thought it was fun. I was having a good time playing around with it and wanted to show you everything I learned. So hope you picked up a thing or two. And if you're interested in learning more about Remix, this work journal app right here actually comes from a course that I just completed over on Build UI. And we start from scratch. We build out the whole thing. It has authentication. It has everything you saw here. We even go and style it kind of from the ground up with Tailwind, and we deploy it, including the backend, the SQLite database to Fly.io, and you kind of get your own little side project that you can use on the public internet. It's authenticated, and you can also use it both to journal your work and everything that you do, but also as a fun little playground to test out new Remix features or anything else in the React ecosystem that you want to play around with. So if you are interested in that, now is a good time to check it out, because if you're watching this during the week that I published it, we are running a Black Friday special on a lifetime membership to Build UI. So normally you would pay $249 for a lifetime membership to Build UI. You get all of our current courses and everything we're going to put out in the future. Right now we have 4 complete courses, and I'm working on a course on Radix right now. And during Black Friday week, we are giving $100 off of that lifetime subscription. So it's going to be $149. You can check a link in the description for that if you're interested. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.